You're listening to Drinks and a Movie with your host, Rudy. Spoiler alert.
All right, hey everyone, welcome to Drinks and Movie Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I've got another spirit-forward episode here. Today I'm going to be talking with a returning guest, Becky Smith. She's been here, I think, 3 times already, right? We talked about Nelson's Greenbrier. We talked about High West Midwinter Night's Dram and Casa Noble Tequila.
Yep.
So, yeah, welcome back again. Thanks
for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to come out. And I think today we're going to be talking about High West from Park City, Utah, right? Yeah. I know we did an episode a while back on Midwinter Night's Dram where we went over, I think it was Act 11, Encore, and we compared Act 10 and 9, I believe.
Yeah.
But you reminded me that we never actually covered the core lineup, and you guys also have some new products out as well. One in particular, which I'm seeing for the first time, which I can't wait to try. So, yeah, just let us know what we're getting in for here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I think we kicked off this relationship by bonding over Midwinter Night's Dram at our friends downtown LA at 7 Grand. And we just hopped right into all of our limited releases, you know, the super fun things that everyone's always looking for. But I love talking about High West, like just our core, you know, like really the flagship, what put us on the map, is really going to start with our Rendezvous Rye. That was our very first bottling. But you can see we've got quite a lineup. I get excited every time we're geeking out at the distillery and doing something new, because it's a new little nugget I get to put in my little library, but also share with folks like you. On that, we did our very first bottled in Bond at High West. So I was able to snag a bottle. Right now, it's distillery only, so you can only get it, I believe, at High West, maybe some shops in Utah, but outside of that, you're not going to find it. But we launched it with great acclaim. So wouldn't be surprised if you see that across the nation next year. And maybe, kind of not as quite a big production as like maybe a Midwinter, which is still pretty small. But we did up that last year. But the other thing I love to talk about is everyone was very used to finding Rendezvous and Campfire, anytime they wanted. We did roll that back, and it was just the bourbon and the double rye. The Rendezvous and the Campfire were limited releases as well. So last year we made a huge move, one that I'm personally super excited about. So now we have what we call our core 4, used to be called the Cowboy Set, keeping in our Western theme. So I'm excited. We now have the bourbon, our double rye, our Rendezvous Rye, and Campfire as year-round foundational whiskeys that you can drink anytime you'd like, which kind of also frees up some space at the distillery to do some fun other projects.
Nice.
One of those being our cask collection. You can see here with a little bit of that more charcoal label. If you followed us previously, we had the Barrel Select. Those are those black labels. Yeah. We got to do, I just say, like, really geek out and do some fun finishes and different blends. So we kind of tightened that up a little bit. We also, now it's only 4 unique selections, and one of them being my personal favorites is the Cask Strength Bourbon. It was the first time last year we ever did a Cask Strength release of anything from High West, and I think, being out and about, a lot of other distilleries are doing that, and, just whiskey aficionados like yourself are, really digging it and loving that high proof. I mean, we're already high proof. Most of our stuff's coming in around 92. So this one upped the ante a bit. It's about 117 and some change. And then we're about to release our second iteration, which is going to be a blend of bourbon and rye. And we really turned up the proof. It's 119.8. So it's clocking in pretty hot. So that's kind of our lineup today that we get to chat about. And I realized, Rudy, in doing this last time, I don't think I ever really explained how I got into this and my love of High West. Well, spirits in general in this industry. But it's funny, I didn't come from this world. I actually had a background in television marketing. I did that for 10 years, moved from South Carolina, where I grew up, worked in New York. And then I moved out to LA, just needing change of scenery. And, that can be a chaotic industry in of itself. I started working at a restaurant in Santa Monica, just wanting to network and, just kind of figure things out. And so I was very fortunate to link up with some really great people who just saw my passion, enthusiasm for the world of hospitality, being a foodie, loving to eat and drink my way through all the new places that I get to go visit. So when the time came and I really wanted to learn more about how to run a bar program, person at the time was just like, okay, here's the keys, which I joke to this day, I was way too green, had no business running that bar.
Right.
But I'm a bit tenacious, and so I just kind of threw myself into it. And really what I saw is there's all these amazing craft spirits. That particular bar, while wonderful, didn't, the culinary program that we were running didn't really match on the beverage side. Had this beautiful wine program, all your big names, just great producers. But on the spirit side, mostly all you saw at that bar were your mainstream, your big houses, your big distilleries. And it was actually my mentor in the industry. He's like a big brother to me. And he introduced me to High West. Being from the South, always loved my bourbons. Rye just never really hit my palate. I always thought it was a bit too harsh, a bit too drying and bitter on the palate for me to really enjoy it. When he told me you need to try High West Rendezvous, I was like, who's that? What's High West? Where are they from? And he said, Park City, Utah. And probably like a lot of people look at me when I talk about it, I was just like, what the hell? Like, who makes whiskey in Utah? That's weird. And now it's probably one of my favorite things to talk about is just that rich history there. But I trusted him. We brought in some High West Rendezvous and I tried it. And it was the first rye whiskey that I ever enjoyed, that I just fell in love with. Time moves forward, and here I am getting to represent High West and talk about it and explain what makes it so special. So that's a little bit of my tie-in and full circle to High West and how I got into this. On that note, you want to crack open some bourbon?
Yeah, let's do it.
Dry palates here. We can't be talking about whiskey without trying some. Let's see. I mean, you've done a few of these whiskey societies, so you've tasted through the bourbon. What are your initial thoughts? One of my favorite things about the bourbon is we are a rye house. That's
right.
Historically, you heard me say Rendezvous is what put us on the map, back in 2007 when we were first getting going. And that, rye at the time was not that common, especially really great,
Right.
rye. And our original founders, Dave and Jane Perkins, man, were they so smart and just really read the landscape of what needed to be done and what was missing, honestly. So we make hella good rye across the board. And then about, I can't remember. It's so funny you think about time. I'm like, I know it's been over 10 years ago for sure, but we started making our bourbon. Our first one was our American Prairie bourbon, which this is the same. This newest batch that we're drinking from this year, we did change up the mash bill a little bit. So this is a blend. It's straight bourbon, but it's a blend of MGP. It's going to be about 75% corn, 21% rye, a little malted barley. And then we also blend it with a Kentucky bourbon, which is going to be higher corn. I want to say that's 84% and only 8% rye.
Oh, okay.
So you're definitely getting, I'm thinking this batch versus maybe if you've had some older ones, a little more of that sweet corn, brown sugar, but you still got a nice rye component in there. So it's going to be, still have what I always tell people, a great backbone. This is such a great workhorse whiskey, your everyday drinker.
Yeah.
I think it has a little bit of something for everybody in there. Also stylistically, this is just bourbon's a lot easier on the palate.
Right, right.
When you're first getting into it, you want that smooth, I won't say Tennessee whiskey, but Tennessee whiskey is bourbon plus. It just goes through the charcoal mellowing. So you do want almost that, really softer foundation. At the end of the day, we're still drinking high proof.
Yeah.
Obviously some other whiskeys, maybe some larger commercial distilleries, they're going to be, that proof might be a little bit lower. Their everyday drinkers might be in that 85, 86 range. We tend to go 92 is, apart from our single malt, 92 is usually where we start because we don't use a chill filtration. So we're keeping all those flavors intact without having to freeze off or separate any of those, flavonoids, oils, things of that nature. So to me, I like it because we do really keep a pretty good essence and backbone, a lot of aromas just on the nose, throughout the palate too. You get what I really probably love the most about High West. I think I'm going to probably trump myself every time with what I love the most. Very complex. We're not doing kind of one note whiskeys.
Right.
We're really driving through the story, the complexity, the flavors, and that comes from a range, of aspects really. A lot of that coming from blending. So I like to say, our history with High West being a baby distillery back in the early 2000s, what are some of the ingredients you need to make whiskey? One one of them being time. You've got to have some minimum age. We didn't have that. So while we were making our own and laying back whiskey, we had to source. And so that's when we became great friends with MGP. In fact, you'll find MGP in almost everything we've got here, except, of course, our bottled in Bond. That's going to be 100% High West distillate. And then we've, over the years, worked with different houses, moving into a partnership with Constellation. It's kind of changed, maybe like this one's undisclosed, our Kentucky friends. Yeah. So we can't actually talk about who's giving us that portion of the recipe, but it's just really fun to see how we differentiate. When you taste, I know you personally taste a lot of whiskeys, yeah. Especially coming out of Kentucky. I mean, I think I threw this stat out before. It shocked the hell out of me, but 85% of American whiskey comes from the state of Kentucky. So I know that's changing, with other amazing distilleries opening, breaking ground in other states and territories, which to me is just exciting. It might seem a little odd that you have a distillery in the middle of a desert somewhere, but I look at us and we're in Park City. Who would have thought? Right. But we are the first legal distillery since 1870. To come back and to open the doors. And now in almost 20 years history, we've expanded our lineup, but we've kind of paved that way for now more than 24 distilleries to open, some wineries, and I've lost count on how many breweries.
Right. All right.
And it's fun. So this used to be called, I think I said this, it used to be called American Prairie Bourbon. 2 years ago, we changed our labels, which you can kind of see. When you line them up, they're all more that sepia tone. We did away with the title American Prairie, mostly because it was confusing. A lot of people thought it was a type of bourbon, right, or style. Actually, it's just a nature preserve in Northeast Montana that we support. We had no intention of making bourbon. It was actually, they came to us, they wanted to have a bourbon to gift folks that came there or that donated. And we were like, we really appreciate that. Bourbon's not really our thing, we're rye, that's what we're gonna do. And, so then kind of back and forth, we just made a little bit for them. Like, here you go, here's a high rye bourbon, kind of in our style, but for them. Had no plans again to market it. And then it was just damn good. So like many great ideas, you just kind of, all right, let's see what we can do with this and expand. So now, like I said, over a decade later, we have this bourbon. We've been laying back our own. One of the fun things I always say about High West is expect the unexpected. You never know when something new is going to drop or what they're working on. The team up there is super creative and really passionate. Yeah. They love what they do. And so it's always fun to see what they're tinkering with and, hear rumblings of certain things that are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by the amount of different, and I remember you talking about this early on, like they get really creative with different finishes for the barrel select program. Like every time I go to Total Wine or a store and I see the black labels, I always got to look at what they are. And it's very much puts me in a mood of like, well, I have to try them all. It's like there's cognac and rum and sherry and this and that. And there's like so many different options out at a time, which is super cool and interesting. And those I wish I brought one of mine because they have like the gold and black. It's like such a super slick look.
And on this one, you got a little embossing here, so it still still makes it pop out. But I'm with you. This particular line is the brainchild of I don't even think I can just call her our sensory and blending expert anymore, Tara Lindley. She's definitely elevated beyond that and is working on some really cool things. But this in particular was her baby, her passion project. And I always tell people the history of us, if you've ever been to Park City and on the main street, we have our High West Saloon. So that's where all the magic started. With a 250-gallon copper pot still right there. In fact, you can still go there. It was an old livery stable back in the day. And then when cars and automotives came around, it transitioned to an automotive garage. They had repainted. And there was a fire. It sat vacant for a while. And there was a fire like across the street. Actually melted off layers of paint on that building. And so you could see layers, and you could see the original signage. In fact, it being an old livery stable is how we got our High West horseshoe as part of our logo. Okay. So when they were remodeling and doing renovations, they popped open a floorboard, and underneath it was a horseshoe that was heads up. which is a sign of good luck. So we already had the name, we already had obviously the property, and where we were going to kind of that identity, and that solidified incorporate that into our logo. But we've been operating out of there since day one. Obviously, we've graduated. We've got a much larger property that we opened in, I think, 2015, 2016, up in Wanship. But that 250-gallon copper pot is still in operation. We still do a lot of our fun, innovative projects, smaller things that, we're not going to use the big 1,700-gallon guy up on the mountain. We're still going to do fun projects and do fun finishing and see just see what we think. I could just imagine you going into the barrel room and storeroom, and like every great distiller, someone that works in in these cellars and barrel rooms, you're making notes. When you're tasting, you're kind of seeing how it's aging, how's it interacting with the wood, the environment. And so, we've got a lot of inventory that, we're getting to play around with and try different things. And in fact, this Cask Strength last year is a blend of straight bourbons. So it's what we've been using as our mash bill. This one on our bourbon's a little bit newer. Okay. So this one was just a little bit lighter on corn, a little higher on rye, just kind of really that piece from Kentucky. Yeah. We had changed out. Also, Tara had sourced from 5 different cooperages for the barrel aging. So it's going to just create more dynamic, more flavor, more complexity in that blend. Moving forward, this year's cask collection is a blend of bourbon and rye. And for the first time ever, we're playing with some Tennessee whiskey for the bourbon component, which is really exciting. You might know who in tandem it works with, but
yeah, I have an idea.
You have an idea. But that's super exciting too. In Tara's words, talking to her about it, it's just, again, they're always, we love what we do, but we're always trying to push that envelope and kind of be, we were pioneers. We set out to, really put ourselves on the market, carve a niche in the American whiskey landscape. Well, what are we doing 20 years later to keep us relevant, but also to keep it exciting? We have a lot of folks at our team that have been with us since day one. So it's not to say you don't lose your interest on creating the OGs, but it is fun to see, what else can we do? What hasn't been done yet, or what has been done, how do we make it different? Right. And that's what I really love about High West too, is you just, each one has its own personality. It's got its own, definitely its own story, which is really fun. Okay. Speaking of the Cask Strength, you ready to try that bad boy?
Yeah, let's do it. And what was the proof on the regular bourbon again?
So the bourbon's 92 proof. Yeah. So now we're upping the ante a little bit. We have 117.4. Yeah,
I was going to say, maybe it's the fact that it's the first drink of the day, but it came in like, I'm not going to say super hot, but like for me, like strong in a really good way, but yet still like soft and balanced at the same time, which I know always seems contradictory, but I love when I get that in a whiskey, because I like them strong. I love anything like cask strength, barrel strength. But when you get something that's of a lower proof that kind of delivers that, but at the same time on the palate has this interesting soft kind of feel, I really dig that. It's definitely, that's a strong, like, I feel caramel forward kind of bourbon, and almost I feel like I get a little, I can't put my head on my thumb on it, but a little bit of a fruit flavor, maybe like a hint of cherry. It reminds me almost like, I don't know if you've had like Jolly Ranchers hard candies, but if there was like a caramel version of that, like I know there's caramel hard candies, but like almost, I don't know, I can't
still
describe
like a little
it, but
fruity,
something, but like a little bit of a hint of fruit in it.
See, I always get like a little bit of stone fruit with this bourbon, which I know maybe isn't like where everyone's mind goes, but I think almost like a little apricot, or something of that, where it's not full stone fruit, and peaches and things of that. I mean, you could. I have definitely had a couple of people, talk about like getting peach from this, but that's why, this is the brand new. This one just launched this year, just a few months ago.
Now I feel like I for sure get, I think peach was a no, but it might just be the influence, because I'm like, oh yeah, it's so obviously peach now.
I had someone tell me one time, I think I was checking out Tennessee whiskey, and they were like, oh yeah, I get like a cracker, like notes of Cracker Jack, like kettle popcorn or whatever. Yeah. And I didn't. And then I went back and I was like, well, shit,
there
now I
it is.
do. Yeah. So, I think you've tasted enough whiskey with me. I don't love to give a ton of tasting notes in general because of that.
Yeah, right.
I think about it in terms of cooking. It's like, I always tell people, especially, wine, but spirits as well, if you're tasting that, taste it again in a different environment or pair it with food because your memory kind of does, your state of mind. I think it's a nice afternoon. I think we're in good spirits. But I am curious to see if you grabbed a bottle and you tasted it in a week or you had it next to some food.
Yeah.
How would that change and how would that influence what's already on your palate?
Yeah.
You might be starting with a clean palate today. That's, like you said, your first whiskey of the day, mine as well. So, that's all these factors go into it. A lot of people are like, no, this is what you taste.
Yeah.
I think in professional capacities, when they're judging spirits and stuff, they taste in a few different scenarios to make sure that it wasn't just like, oh, that was really good or that was really bad. It all influences the palate.
Yeah. I feel like more and more I'm bringing that up, like throughout the podcast and even the little tasting videos I do, where to the point where I'll do some whiskeys like on the podcast like 2 or 3 times, and with different just to see because like you said, it's always different, and it's funny how much it's very experiential, but that's part of what I love about it is like it gives everything a chance to evolve and hopefully for the better and not for the worst.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway.
Well, I'm curious to see what you think about this one. I don't know if you've tried this one before. I think you might have at the last.
Yeah, I think I did.
This one is from our friends, again, at 7 Grand, downtown LA. They have been big High West supporters for quite a few years. In fact, this is their third private barrel, small batch.
Okay.
So on this bottle, it's 7 Grand, number 3. So shout out to those guys and gals over there for the support. But to me, this one, granted, this is a different mash bill. So take that into account when you're tasting. Obviously, got a much higher proof. But I'm curious to see what you think about this because the first time I tasted it, I'm thinking, this is pretty hot. I'm curious to see how it is. And I thought it was actually a little bit smoother, almost a little bit sweeter than our everyday bourbon.
It's right in the pocket. And that's the funny thing, jumping from 92 to 117, I think you said, I don't really feel much of a jump. You would think it'd be way bigger, but man, it doesn't come out that much hotter at all. I'd agree with the smoothness. I definitely get like a spicier quality. It kind of sparks I feel like the pop rocks on the tongue kind of effect, you know? I think it's a little, I don't know that I'm getting like sweeter notes on it. Like maybe a little bit of like a brown sugar kind of vibe, but it's almost a little more probably spicy to me.
Okay. I love that. I think that's also what makes tasting so fun with other people is your palate is going to be vastly different than mine. And so it's super fun to see what really stands out to you, what you're going to pick up and draw from it. Also, what you're going to pick up on the first sip versus the second versus the bottom of the bottle.
The finish is definitely fruit forward.
Yeah.
Maybe like a strawberry kind of thing.
I even think the nose on this is a little more fruit than what you get on the bourbon. I think the bourbon, for me, I pull through like a lot of those like softer baking spices. So you're getting more of that caramel, the vanilla, of course, brown sugar. Whereas when I smelled this one, just, pulling the bottle over, it was definitely a little more like fruit forward, a little more aromatic in that sense.
Okay.
Which I find really exciting, unique. It's not like we're usually drinking whiskey being like, oh yeah, I'm getting all these fruit notes.
Right. Well, here's the thing too, and I feel like I probably looked this up before, but I forgot. You mentioned this when we talked about the bourbon, like the stone fruit note. And I hear that a lot when I listen to other tasters, stone fruit. What is so stone fruit's referring to what? Like apricots, peaches, like plums, and
anything
that kind of stuff with the
like a
big
seed.
Yeah,
anything with a seed inside of it, I think is how it gets its name is stone fruit. So really, not to get all nerdy and granular about like your systemic approach to tasting, but you kind of have the scale of like your really ripe fruit. So your dark fruits and black cherries, then you've got your red fruits.
Right.
So like strawberries, red cherries, things in that nature. And then you have citrus, of course. And I think we all know lemons, limes, orange, grapefruit. Then you start to move into this other side of the spectrum, which is usually going to be juicier, softer fruit typically, and that's when you get your stone fruit that kind of then moves all the way over to tropical fruit. So that's going to be your pineapple, mangoes, papayas, really big. I think sometimes too, of course, those flavors, kind of overlap a little bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is made from not just the mash bill, like some of those flavors are coming from that and the choices made there in the blending, but also in the fermentation. So what kind of yeast you're introducing to it. At High West in particular, we use a few different strains, but a couple of those are unique to us. So you're not going to find them in any other whiskey. I think that's one of the things, again, it gets you really nerdy and in the nitty gritty. But the yeast strain that you use and what you introduce to the whiskey or any spirit or wine, it has a huge impact on flavor and how it's going to, start that conversion. So it's really impactful. That's why there are laboratories that, create unique yeast strains, or they take hybrids of things. And then you have natural wild yeast. So like at Casa Noble, we're one of the few distilleries in the world there that uses a wild yeast fermentation. So we take what's from the distillery. We have open vat fermentation. So we let Mother Nature kind of do her thing with the agave. Grain, it's a little bit different. It's more to break down because it's not naturally sugar, right? And now I'm getting like super on my scientific high horse. But so you've got those two choices, and then you get into distillation. So putting it in a column still versus a pot still, that's going to produce two different flavor styles. If you do a hybrid and you start to blend them, that's a whole other category. And then also how you're distilling. Are you distilling for long aging? Or is it going to be short aging?
Right.
What is your barrel aging process in totality? What kind of wood are you using? So at each step, you're kind of creating, and you can kind of pull from why it tastes like this, why it has more of this, why is it that? So that's I'll put my science, I'll close my science textbook now. But that's kind of the, I talk about this in like, I'm such a nerd, but it is really the art of, or it's the science of distillation and the art of blending.
I'm always amazed, and I have to try not to think about this too much, because sometimes, I hear stuff like that and I think about, man, all the years and like centuries, I guess, or whatever, of people that had to figure that out over time. Because with, whiskey being such a long game sport, where it's like, at what point did they figure out it has to be brand new oak versus this oak, and we're going to wait 10 years to find out what's, but you know what I mean? Or like even 4 years, like, okay, which yeast is going to be better, or this and that, or which, like how many mash bills did people try before they figured out, oh, this is the way to go. That's corn, rye, malted barley, or, throw wheat in there, whatever the case may be. It's amazing to me. And man, thank you to all the historical people that laid a barrel down for like 20 years and never even got to try it.
All the folks that did the legwork.
Yeah. Or they laid a barrel down for 20 years or whatever just to realize like, oh, this actually kind of sucks. It doesn't taste good. Whoops. I guess we're going to cap it off at 12 or whatever it may be,
And I think that's one of the coolest things when I say we're like super geeky. It's not just us, it's the community at large, right? And all those people that have come before us. But it's exactly that is people, you went with what was accessible. What made sense. What could you get your hands on? What was super cheap? I think the other side of it is probably back, when this all first started, they weren't looking to long age. It was, it started for medicinal purposes, and then it was just kind of like, this gets you a little slosh, So it wasn't until, I'm sure, much like all of us, like, that tastes pretty good already. I wonder what happens if I just leave it in there a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, maybe somebody was forgetful and they were just like, damn, I don't know how long that's been in there, but it's drinking pretty nice. I'm sure it was probably a little bit of D, all the above. But I just look at it too, different things that we're trying and doing. Just still on the grand scheme of things, we're still a very young distillery coming in at almost 20 years old, and then or just shy of 20 years. But then also just these huge conglomerates that are generations
Right.
of producers and distillers, and look at what everybody's doing. You constantly see, I know I do. I love seeing what everyone else is doing and trying new things. I'm like, oh, haven't seen that before. Oh, we haven't done that. But I will say a lot of these cool finishes, the new mash bills that we're seeing, if you look at what we call the main or the large commercial distilleries, they actually only use a certain amount of recipes.
Right.
They have maybe their tried and true that's 100 years old, and then they play variations on that. It's different blending techniques, or it's different aging techniques, or finishing, what have you. It really is more of the craft distillers that have introduced new mash bills and new blending techniques, and now they're like, oh, wait, everyone's going to these little craft, smaller distilleries and smaller producers. We've got the capabilities. We should do more fun things.
Right.
So some of those very high-end spirits that used to not be that much, we, I think, have put the price point, the supply and demand on them. But if you really drill it back to what they are, they're still beautiful whiskeys, no mistake about it. But at the end of the day, that's probably the same mash bill that you're getting in this $30 bottle of whiskey. And, all they've changed is maybe the age on it. It might be a little different blend. It's not like they're reinventing something new every time.
Right.
So to me, I'm like, is a $3,000 bottle of whiskey really worth that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure others could, get in the ring. We could debate it a little bit, but I'm like, it's meant for drinking. Let's have fun with it.
Yeah. I saw someone was doing a weekend special. I follow a lot of stores.
Yeah.
And I won't name it or anything, but it was to get this particular 18-year-old bourbon, you had to buy 12 bottles of another 7-year-old bourbon at $50 each. So you buy those 12, then you get the opportunity to buy the 18-year-old one for $999.99. And I was telling my girlfriend about it, and she's like, if you could, would you do that? And I was like, just on principle, no. No.
Just on principle, no.
Yeah, no, man. I appreciate that someone laid it down for 18 years, but at the end of the day, it's still just some juice.
Yeah.
And
and then it's funny, I could, again, belabor this for a while, but you talk about, especially with rye, sometimes the longer you're aging it, honestly, it might not be in the whiskey's best interest.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to those principles of distilling and how they're making the whiskey. Scotland in particular, you have the most variation in their process, especially their still. So everybody, a lot of them have the same mash bill or similar recipes, just because, again, it's a small island where they're sourcing their grain, where they make a lot of their production choices. And what makes them nuanced and different from each other is they might have a taller still head, a bigger pot. They might be heating it from a different source, which has different reactions. So you think about that. You're creating, just in that one, that one house, you're creating this specific, you change one little piece, you're creating a whole different whiskey.
Right.
And then are you making that choice because we want to long age a lot of things, we're going to lay back in barrels for 10, 15, 20 plus years? Or is this, we're making choices because we only need this to be 4, 5, 8 years, maybe.
Right.
So that's what it really boils down to, those pretty basic, foundational steps. But just you have a combination of numbers, you can create, a myriad of variations, which is really fun, and we get to benefit from it.
Yeah. Right.
So we tasted our bourbons, and like I told you, we never set out to be a bourbon house, but it's pretty damn cool to see how well received our bourbons are. That people, sometimes I'm walking into a bar and I'm finding this on the back bar and none of our ryes, which is to me wait, what?
Wow.
High West for our bourbon, not for our rye?
Yeah.
Man, I got to show you some stuff because, I kind of joke too with the price point of your bourbon and your double rye. These are your everyday drinkers. You're not going to break the bank on finding them in the store. So it's kind of why not both? Let's get them both. And of course, I love to see, a whole High West wall. It's fun.
Yeah.
For someone who represents the brand, but it's really cool because a lot of people that know High West bourbon that are maybe newer or just, hey, they got introduced to it, they really loved it, and then tell them just even a snapshot of who we are, a little bit of our history and how we got started, and they're like, I've never had your rye. That's I'd love to try it. Like I'm not a big, and then you also find a lot of people aren't rye drinkers. It is a smaller subsect that really goes for rye. I think that category's grown exponentially since we first came on the scene. But it's really cool to see that people who don't even like ryes, they're more bourbon. They're like, this is really good. And I see that a lot when I try the Rendezvous. I think sometimes the double rye can still be a little too herbaceous or vegetal for some folk, but I just love this double rye. I think it's really fun in cocktails too. So with that, you want to pour?
That's good.
Didn't know you were just going to be just lushing it out today, huh?
Yeah.
I love this little guy. So it used to say double rye with an exclamation point on the bottle. I always talk about this in terms of like Spinal Tap the situation. So we had our Rendezvous, that was our flagship and put us on the map. And then essentially that was a bit more of our own pot still whiskey in there. We started working with MGP, blending in a bit. I say we started. We were always working with them, but we started to up that ante and blend in a bit more MGP into it. So it's going to be more of that column still. The mash bill on this, it is 2 mash bills. So that's also part of the double part. And then I always say rye exclamation point because it was like the rye-est of ryes, which I do realize is probably not a phrase, but I've made it my own because that's really what we set out to do, is to make a very young, bright rye, like very, trying to think of the right word, but like encapsulate, like when you think of rye, like the grain or rye bread, you're getting this in double rye. So it's a blend of MGP, which is going to be 95% rye and 5% malted barley. And then you have our particular mash bill of rye, which is going to be an 80% rye and 20% malted rye, which is not that common. And we do that, funny enough, I've never asked why we do it, but just in my experience of what malted rye does, it kind of like softens the grain a bit.
Okay.
So you're still getting that, obviously a lot of structure, a lot of personality driven by the rye. But when you malt it, it's kind of softening that a little bit. It's going to get more of that like green sprout coming from the grain. So I don't like to say sweeter or sweeten it up, but it does kind of like just kind of mellow out the rye a little bit. So if you look at anything that is high West distillate when it comes to rye, that's going to be our mash bill. Yeah. See, already, I think now that I said it, I definitely, I love dill pickles. And this is very much like admitting an embarrassing moment. Maybe it's a blonde moment, but I didn't know for the longest time that dill was an herb. I thought it was just like dill was a type of pickle.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know. I am now enlightened, everyone. Don't worry. This was several years ago, but I realized that dill is actually an herb, like thyme and rosemary and sage and mint. And so now I'm like, oh, I do pick up on the dill. It's become one of my favorite herbs. So I might be a little partial and akin to this, but I love this double rye because it's a bit more earthy and vegetal, and you just get like some mint and eucalyptus in there perhaps, and I just think that that's really fun, especially when we might use these second glasses to do Rendezvous next to it, because I love to see when people say, well, what is the difference between double rye and Rendezvous? You're going to know on the nose, on the palate. I can tell you the technical reasons why. But I always love to be like, well, taste it and see. Like, what do you think are the differences?
The nose is great. It's great. I feel like coming after the cask strength, for me, it might be a little soft on the palate. What's the proof on this one?
92.
92?
Yeah.
Okay, so same as the bourbon?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I was showing you this earlier. And maybe, I don't know, you want to side by side these?
So I think that's what we got to do. We got to side by side. This is a 2022 double rye production. Yeah. And then you've got a 2016.
Yeah. I'm really bad about drinking my bottles, everyone.
I love it. What I was thinking too, just being a High West fangirl myself, outside of what they pay me to do, is around this time, in my opinion, from some of the bottles that I have or have tasted, I think this era of High West, if you think about it, we were about 10 years old at that point, and we were making some just delightful, like absolutely exceptional whiskeys during that time. So I've had Campfire and Boo Rye. I am trying to think if I've had Double Rye in that time. I know I've had Rendezvous. So if you think about like those are some of this year, like I would say the 2016, 17, 18 era are some of my favorite High West whiskeys. So it's very fun because I do think 2023, 24 have also probably starting last year have in my palate returned us to this time.
Okay.
Which is really fun.
Yeah.
I might pour a little bit more here.
You.
So just looking at the color, is it me or does that 2016 look just a tinge darker? Maybe it could have been the light.
Yeah, maybe a little, slightly. Yeah, when I hold it up here, just a tiny bit.
I was about to say nothing crazy.
I'll hold these up so everyone can see the differences in the label, the color, got that exclamation point.
Yeah.
And this is still, at this point, it's the same 95.5 MGP and 80.20 malted, right? Or
You know,
is it a little different?
I'd have to go and kind of research that, but I don't believe we've changed that mash bill. But don't hold me to that.
Let's see. I wonder if it's.
I wasn't working for the brand or dissecting their mash bill back in 2016, so. But I'm trying to think of what year we changed to from putting more of our own juice, MGP. We used to work with, oh my gosh, I am blanking on now. We used to back in the day work with Heaven Hill and I think Wild Turkey at a point. This is all, pre-Constellation days. So yeah, when I said we worked with a lot of houses. I think once upon a time we worked Bardstown a little bit, so I think this is the 16. Is it? We'll find out. Might have done the little scramble.
I think I put it right here.
Okay, so this is going to be the 16.
I think so, yeah.
And I refilled my, yeah. Oh, yeah, just even on the nose.
That palate's pretty different. Yeah, the nose too. I feel like for me, the nose was quite a bit brighter on the newer one.
I would even say on the palate too. I think the double rye we're producing right now is a bit brighter, bit, as we like to say, punchier. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ooh, it's really fun. I love that you still have this.
Yeah, yeah. I have a bad habit of opening and drinking a little bit and then buying something else and just continuing to do that, but. It makes for interesting moments like this.
Well, what I'm curious about is how much High West distillate was going into this. So, like I said, we were still a pretty infantile distillery. I don't know how much we were making. At that point, I think more of our juice was going into Rendezvous instead of Double Rye. So this could very well be more MGP and another distillery. It might not have any High West owned distillate. Again, I can't remember the date, the year when we kind of switched over.
Yeah.
I know we've been ramping up, producing more of our own whiskey than we have before, and we've really been blending more of that in. I think there were a couple of years where still in that same flavor profiles, that swim lane, if you will, but we also were putting more of our own juice into it. So we were figuring out who we were as distillers. We kind of knew who we were as blenders. Our master distiller, Brendan Coyle, he came right out of the graduate program in Edinburgh. So he was in very much the center of blending, and such historic houses and styles. He came over and worked for us. As soon as he graduated, he was our first and only distiller at the time. Okay. So also you think about that as we were pretty damn good at blending and knew what we were doing, how to work with different, different distillates. But then we start distilling our own, and we start learning about ourselves and what kind of flavor profile we want to do. I'm sure there was a lot of trial and error. And then also now we've created a product that people know and recognize. It's pretty, concrete in what that tastes like and what we want it to be. So if we're putting more of our own juice, that's probably different than where we're sourcing from here or there.
Right.
Our grain comes from less than a day's drive outside the distillery. So we're going as far as southern Utah.
Okay.
Or southern Utah, sorry. Southern Idaho, northern Utah. So that grain's probably going to taste a lot different than what you're getting in the Midwest.
I was gonna ask that next, if the grain is actually from like Utah too, or is that
so what we're using for our own distillate, we try to be pretty sustainable and keep it also just like support the local agriculture, local economy. So everything we try to do is very community driven and focused. So for that, we try to only source grain that's less than a day's drive from the distillery to save on gas, kind of minimize that carbon footprint as much as we can. So yeah, that's a great question, a great talking point as to just part of our ethos and who we are at High West. But it is really curious to see. I also feel that 2016, we broke ground. I think 2015, we broke ground and opened the distillery up in Wanship. So huge, beautiful facility if you're ever able to get up there. And we've got that 1,700 gallon copper pot still. That is a hybrid as well. So I can only imagine this 2016 is still some older blended juice. I don't know that this would be ours. Just thinking of the math and the timeline.
Yeah.
I know I should probably know better in the whole history of everything. But like I said, I guess I'm not cracking open the history books and asking all the questions, just going off of what I know and what I've tasted through the years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in this moment in time, I'm more leaning towards the newer expression, I think, right now. I think I like that more punchy quality, too.
So funny. I just had a second taste of it, and I feel like more of the spice, more of the brightness is shining through from the 2016.
And the older one, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it just needed a little air. I don't know when's the last time, that bottle was popped open.
It's been a while. It's been quite a while.
We're letting the genie out of the bottle.
It's even like the fact that I got this in 2016, or at least came out in 2016, like it's dawning on me that like, oh, that was like 8 years ago. Good Lord. And so...
Yeah. Tell me about it. Time. I don't know where it goes. So you say 2016. I'm like, that was just oh shit, that was almost 10 years ago. Got it. Which really leads us to, everything I was saying is Rendezvous. I think it's a great time while we still got a little bit, or at least I have some in the glass, is talking about more of our origins and our history. So again, we came about in 2006. Our first bottling was 2007 with Rendezvous. This is, I call her baby girl. This is, like I told you earlier, this is what made me fall in love with rye and really get into that category and appreciate it more than I ever did before. I was a bit more dismissive and like, that's just not for me. But I didn't really, give it the true, appreciation that it probably deserved and understanding. But Dave and Jane Perkins, kind of how they had this idea for High West is they were at a wedding in Kentucky. Actually, our friends over at Maker's Mark is where the wedding was. And like probably a lot of us, they wanted to go and, we're here, let's go do a tour, let's see the grounds. I don't know if you've ever been to Maker's Mark. It's incredible, huge piece of property. But the family has had that in the land and their family for generations. And what I appreciate about them is a lot like what we're about: sustainability, regenerative farming. They want to give back to the land that they are growing and taking so much from. So Dave and Jane, Dave being a biochemist by trade, had done that for a couple of decades from my understanding, was pretty well into his career, but kind of looking for a change as he was touring the distillery and seeing, fermentation vats and chemical compounds and all of that stuff. He saw a lot of parallels and similarities to what he was doing in big pharma, biotech kind of world. And kind of looked at it, Jane. Jane is the great-granddaughter of a master distiller from Rochester Distilling, who they did single malt, which is fun, considering our ties to high country now. But basically, it was just like, I could do this. But, which I also say, just think about that for a second. Like, you're going through a distiller and you're like, well, I can make whiskey.
Right.
I could do this. Which I think is pretty cool. I think that's pretty, adventurous and of him. He also grew up in the West. His family at the time was living in Colorado, but he had just grown up skiing, just really loved, him and his family loved that Mountain West community, that vibe. And so a couple of things kind of all happened at the same time, which was great. And also the market at the time. Like I said, when we started, rye wasn't really a big category. If someone was doing it, wasn't in a true craft nature. And then you look at why Utah, apart from his own love of that, Utah actually has a pretty rich history there of whiskey making or whiskey drinking.
Right.
And, we did have distilleries that were there dating back into the 1800s. So it's kind of really cool to see all of this come together. So, Rendezvous was born. This is the biggest difference, apart from, obviously, I think when you taste it. But the biggest difference is this is going to be a little bit older rye. So double rye is going to be 2 to 7 years in that blend. Whereas Rendezvous is about 4 to 9, 4 to 10, depending on the year. So a little bit older. It's still going to be a dual mash bill between MGP and High West. However, this is going to be more of our own distillate. So more of that copper pot still versus double rye is going to be a bit younger, bit more of the MGP whiskey blended in. So more of that, again, that vegetal column still production. I always say you're going to get more of your bigger rye notes, baking spices, Christmas time, feel from Rendezvous, but in a very smooth, knows how to tone itself. And so with that, you kind of cleared house, but
Thank you. Yeah, I remember when I first tried these years ago, I always gravitated more towards the double rye. That's why that's the one I have. But over the years, doing more tastings and going back and trying it again, the Rendezvous's definitely grown on me, and I never realized at that time that it was an older kind of expression, I guess.
Yeah, that's like I said, we kind of for a minute hung our hats on the Rendezvous.
Yeah.
I mean, in the best way, because I think we made damn fine whiskey and we could. This is one of my favorites to probably reintroduce to folks.
Yeah.
People that are like, oh man, I used to love Rendezvous. Oh, I haven't seen it in a while, and I'm like, she's back.
Yeah.
Here she is. Because I do think that this is just a phenomenal rye whiskey. I mean, obviously, I'm very privileged to understand a little more of the nuances and what goes into it and why it's so special. But I just think on my palate, this is definitely where I gravitate towards. I love the bourbon and the double rye. Again, it's those workhorse whiskeys, those everyday drinkers, throw them in a cocktail, drink it neat, what have you. Rendezvous, still not crazy expensive, not going to break the bank on a bottle. But if you're going to do it in a cocktail, definitely probably more spirit forward, a little, probably more precision in the ingredients that we're choosing, or you're going to drink it neat or on the rocks, versus just I got a bottle of Rendezvous, let me just shoot it out. Fine, too. To me, already, we're going back, which is funny because obviously no corn in here, but I do go back on the nose to a little more of the vanilla or caramel, a little more of that oak, spice coming to it.
Yeah.
Whereas with the double rye, I tend to go... I don't get that right off the nose.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I mean, I can't even talk about anything specific right now. I just know it's good.
You're just be dreaming about it the rest of it.
And I had a little bit of the double left, so I did a little back and forth. And I guess for me right now, it's not wildly different. Surprisingly, I thought I was going to get way more bigger difference. It's weird. And that's the thing where, obviously talking about spirits and everything, everyone wants to know specific flavors, right? And aromas. But sometimes for me, it's, I get flavors, but if I can't decipher them, it's more feelings or shapes. There's many times where I'm like, oh, this feels very round, or this one feels really sharp, and I don't know how I quantify that. Just for me, that's how I make sense of it.
Also, just from I don't know, I think of a palate thing. I have friends that love melon. They love honeydew and cantaloupe and watermelon. I like watermelon. I cannot stand cantaloupe or honeydew melon. So crazy. If you're telling me that something tastes or you're just oh my God, this is such a good melon.
Yeah.
I hate that. My palate, I don't like it. I hate coconut. So anytime people tell me those things, I'm immediately a little turned off, or I'm probably not going to like this. It's not in my flavor wheel. However, I think again, that goes to why I don't really give those things. I can give you the standard textbook, what the text sheet says of tasting notes. But I know that for me, I pull out different things. And like we already said, the moment you put something an idea into someone's head, I don't want that to overshadow what you're picking up. And, it is very different. I think while these are definitely nuanced, I think you enjoyed both of them.
Oh yeah, no, I dig them both.
But they don't have to be a pronounced, difference. They're still from the same house. They're still going to be the same mash bill. We just kind of changed those percentages. One gets to those lots get to stay in the barrel a little bit longer, so you might get, at least for me, especially on the nose, I get more of the barrel notes than I do on double rye, just because there's some of it that's not spending as much time, in the barrel and having that wood contact, which is going to bring us into bottled and bond, which I haven't tasted this in a while. So I got this bottle a few months ago. I shared it with some really great friends in the industry. It's kind of why I have it. It's kind of little fun tool that I have. So feel free to pour you some. If you want to do a little Rendezvous bottled and bond comparison, feel free. It's probably going to be the closest, I would say, as far as a comparison point. This is straight rye. It is 100% per the regulations, the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897. There's quite a few rigorous requirements. So it has to be minimum 4 years aged, has to be from the same house, on the same location in a single growing season or distilling season. And it also has to be aged in a bonded warehouse. So fun things, so this is a 100% High West distillate. It's that 80-20 malted rye and rye mash bill. So I'm curious because the last time I had it, this seems like a taboo. I guess I'll just bottoms up. But yeah, we're working on this, just something fun to do, of course. And launched it earlier this year. That was a bit much, but launched this earlier this year. And I was pleasantly surprised by how it turned out. We've gotten some fun accolades, so it's cool to see. I'm going to separate that so I don't.
Yeah. And so is this one, sorry, you may have said this already, but is it right? Did you guys pull it from the barrel right at the 4-year mark, or is it?
No. It's older. Okay. It's a blend as well. Yeah. But the minimum is 4 years on this. Whereas like the bourbon, granted this is rye, but like the bourbon is a blend of anywhere from as low as 2 years up to, I think this batch goes up to 15 years. So each batch, depending on the grain and the distillate we get, it might be 13, 14, maybe 15 years. We definitely have been playing around with some older whiskeys. The cask strength that we had was an average of 4 to 9 years. What's the blend? Double rye is 2 to 7. Rendezvous is 4 to 9, and bottled and bond is a minimum of 4. I wish you hadn't asked me because I went right out the brain of the years on that. I would imagine it's probably a 4 to 10 as well because it is rye. Typically with rye, because it's peak maturation at a much younger age at like that 2 to 3 year mark, maybe 2 to 4. So as you start to get older, that's why sometimes for me, when I see like a 15, a 20-year-old rye, I'm not really sure if it's going to be that great. I understand the intention behind it. Yeah. But it might just be too much because of where that grain, really its sweet spot lies. Right. Doesn't mean I don't like to try them and see. But sometimes I tend to think like I like 7 to 8 year ryes. I think those are like a really fun sweet spot across the board. Curious to see what you think.
I mean, I like it a lot. I think it's super well balanced. Like the spice and like the 100 proof is nice and soft, but still lights up my tongue with like a lot of that pepper spice. Like definitely rye, probably like a nutmeg, I think is the one that to me is like a little more like a citrusy, just a little bit. And then going back to like the Rendezvous, I do feel like on the front of the palate, it's like kind of, it takes a second for the flavors to come out for me, which is always interesting when that happens. Finish is good. I mean, I like it a lot. Yeah.
Oh. And you hit the last point. I did forget that it also, per the requirement, has to be bottled at 100 proof. So we've kind of run the gamut a little bit. We've done 392s, 117.4. We're now back at 100. And then we'll round out with Campfire, which curious after all of this, where it's 92 proof, but we'll see how you feel because, ending with that smokiness. I agree with you. I love this bottled and bond because I think it is such a well-balanced whiskey. You've got all the right notes of being, the age being a little more soft and mellow, but in the right areas. It's not overly, punchy in the face rye, but it still retains all those beautiful characteristics, all the nice spice notes. I just think when you talked about like being softer or sharper, I think that finish just kind of lingers in a very subtle, velvety way, which to me is like the mark of a very a quality whiskey. Like you want to keep drinking that again. It's not like, oh, okay, I'm one and done. That was good.
Like it still has texture to it, which is a really good thing.
And I think it's something like we could continue to chew on and talk about and have other things express themselves if we weren't moving, down the line.
Yeah, I dig that a lot. I always love seeing distilleries like this do their bottled and bond products where it's like, there's a lot of like sourcing and half distillate. So it's always neat when they come out and like, all right, here's purely like our juice, I love that.
It's really cool. I didn't bring it today, but High Country is the other product currently that is 100% High West distillate. That is American single malt, so it's going to be 100% that malted barley base. We do a tri-malt base on that, so you've got your pretty traditional malted barley. We also do a chocolate barley and a caramel. I say that, and those names aren't. It's not like it's chocolate and caramel in the way we think, and super sweet. It just gives some softness to that. And that is the one spirit that comes in at 88 proof. So it's a little bit lower, mostly because it's barley. So you don't need to blow it out with high proof. But to be an American single malt, you have to be, single producer. So at the distillery, and blended and barreled, aged all at our facilities. So I would say American single malt, bottled and bond have a lot of similarities as far as regulations go.
Right.
But obviously this is a straight rye versus being, single malt. But it is really fun. I hope we continue to do more of our. I know we will not ever be exclusively High West distillate. I say that. I mean, never say never, right? But blending is such a huge part of our DNA. It's really how we got going. It's a huge part of who we are now. I can't see that changing. We have such great relationships.
Right.
People that have helped us from day one. What I do seeing is potentially us making other products or getting to a point where maybe we are providing our distillate to some others, to some other small craft distilleries that are trying to get up off the ground. So who knows? Our juice might go into another bottle that's undisclosed that others don't know about, but we know know who we're helping. But I do think I get that asked a lot. The more that we have finessed, to me, I think we've really hit our stride with our own distillate. I think this Rendezvous, Rendezvous was fantastic this past year. Campfire that we're going to end on, phenomenal. It's, been one of my favorite bottlings since probably that 2016. I have a 2016 and a 2018 at home, a 2020, 21, etc. I've tasted some older ones, but I don't have them in my collection. And this is drinking like so well. I love everything about this. And then last year, I thought Midwinter was one of the best batches we've had in a few years. Again, doesn't mean the others aren't great.
Yeah.
Just to my palate, what I think, to me, that all starts with what we're doing with our own distillate. So, if, you just take, hey, Rendezvous is shining really freaking good because it's more of our own distillate. We know how to blend it beautifully. Well, now Campfire, this is the first time the rye component of that was 100% High West distillate.
Right.
So then Rendezvous is the foundation of Midwinter. Of course, all of these are gonna be looking and tasting pretty damn good because of what we're doing. We've really kind of figured out who we are as distillers, which is exciting. So it's like we were master blenders, now we're master distillers. Put that together, I hate to say we're unstoppable, but I'm just saying we're doing some pretty damn cool things. So on that note, if you want to round it out with Campfire, I mean, that's a great way to bring it home. And I can kind of talk about while you're pouring, apart from the whiskey itself, which I'll get into, but some stuff I love. You heard me talk about the bourbon being American Prairie, and proceeds of this bottle go back to American Prairie. So 10% of every bottle sold goes back to that nature preserve. By 2025, which can't believe is next year, we have a campaign to donate $1 million to our Protect the West initiative, 3 philanthropies and organizations that we work with, and one of those being American Prairie. The other is Protect Our Winters, which is a really cool organization. In fact, Shaun White, I think he's pretty well known, but Olympic snowboarder, X Games winner, just cool dude all around. He has come on board as a brand partner and ambassador for Protect Our Winters and Protect the West. Obviously, the mountains and the hills and the community are pretty important to him. And then we also provide with Campfire proceeds of every bottle sold go back to it's basically a wildfire but firefighter organization. So just trying to take care of those folks that do fight the wildfires that come about, unfortunately, every season. So it's not Smokey the Bear, but similarly, like, don't start one but drink one. Like, don't start a campfire but drink Campfire. But with that, like, we do have a lot going on. I think you heard me talk about it. Like, we're trying to minimize our carbon footprint. We actually take some of our spent mash and we give it back to, I call them happy cows in the community. So they get some of that kind of like beer wash. So we try to recycle and reuse anything that we can, try to minimize our water usage. I think that's a really cool thing about Constellation in general. A lot of the properties and, some of these artisanal locations that we partner with and acquire, they're all about sustainability. They're all about either organic farming, regenerative farming. It's really important to us at a holistic level. So it's really cool that High West has been doing that all along. And it was, I think, a natural fit. And, if the last 10 years, I think, have shown like High West has grown exponentially and more people are finding it. I think one of my favorite things is go to a lot of places. Oh, I know High West. I love High West. Yeah. Then you go to somewhere, I've never heard of it. What do you mean? Like whiskey in Utah. And that is like such a fun thing to talk about to this day. Almost 20 years into it, we are still kind of like, we're little teenagers. Right. I know. So I know you love midwinter. Like, I know that's your fave. But what are your thoughts on Campfire? I know you've had it a couple of different times, a few different iterations. Yeah,
it's really grown on me over the years. Like right now, it's actually kind of hitting the spot in a really good way. I remember the first couple times I tried it, it was so smoky to me and so strong. And I mean, this was probably around 2016 too, actually, because that's when I really started getting into whiskeys. And I was working at Monty, so I had the opportunity of going in on my day off and like trying everything that was on there at a discount. And I remember very clearly trying Double Rye, Rendezvous, Campfire, because we had those there. And it just wasn't for me. And I would keep trying it every once in a while if I saw it. So I was like, I'll try it again. Let's see. Still not for me. But yeah, the last couple of years going to like some more of these tastings. And even now I was curious what my feelings were going to be. It's really grown on me. Like, I like that. I like the hint of smoke off the nose. It's not too overbearing. It almost opens up to more of the like vanilla characteristic, and even on the palate, it's just very nice. And there's something about it that, I guess with it being the summertime, I think like beach bonfire and s'mores and that whole again, like experience, right? It makes me, kind of puts me in that mindset, which is a good feeling. So yeah, right now I'm actually really digging it.
All right.
It's really good.
Well, I like to think that we kind of prime the palate for Campfire, As I said, this is the first time with 2023 2023's bottling, the rye component is 100% High West distillate. So previously it had still been a dual mash bill. So it's really cool. And I think we kind of edged our way into it. For those at home who've never had Campfire, don't know about it, we were the first ones to do something as crazy as a tri-blend of bourbon, rye, and peated Scotch. Sounds like maybe it wouldn't work, with all the very strong personalities, especially peated Scotch being the most. That is one mash bill, or I wouldn't say mash bill. I know the mash bill, but the blend percentages that they do not share. I would imagine the Campfire or the peated Scotch isn't as strong, isn't as high.
Right.
Just because it's a pretty pronounced flavor.
Yeah.
But I do love to talk about this and just the origin story, because it happened very organically, as so much did for us at High West. But Dave and Jane Perkins, back to our original founders, were vacationing. I think they were actually at a distillers summit in Scotland, and they were down in Islay, which is that southern part where most of your peated whiskeys or peated Scotch come from. And they were staying at a B&B, and they were there for breakfast, and they smelt, we smell like peat, like it's getting cooked and a bit caramelized. So Dave, being himself, was just like, oh, what are they doing? So he talked to his waitress, and server came over, and she was like, oh, they're preparing for dinner, for dessert later tonight. You guys should come back and try it. And so him and his wife did after everything, and they tried it. Speaking of melon, it was a honeydew melon dessert with a caramelized peated glaze over the honeydew melon. So everything they were experiencing, talk about sensory overload, they were smelling and tasting the sweetness of the honeydew melon, brown sugar from the caramelization, a little bit of vanilla and caramel from that. Obviously, the peat, from that's what they, obviously caramelized. And then there was nutmeg or cinnamon sprinkled on as part of that. So they, for Dave, being already, we were making rye. I think at that point we were making bourbon. So to him, it was kind of oh, I need to bottle this. I need to find a way to encapsulate, you've got this pronounced smokiness, but it's really softened in the elegance, and it's lengthened by the bourbon, and then you've got still such a nice backbone by the rye. So that's kind of how it was born from our distilling team that they talk about. They were ready to throw in the towel. I think they had worked on this blend. I want to say they had given it 75 tries.
Really?
75 tries of blending. And we're basically just man, I don't think it's going to work.
Yeah.
I get what you're trying to achieve, but we've tried. We have tried and we've tried. Apparently number 76 was we've got it. That's the one. We finally hit it before we were ready to throw in the towel. And boy, am I pretty damn excited. I mean, Campfire outside of Midwinter is hands down one of the most talked about and sought after spirits that we produce to this day, almost a decade later. So I'm glad they didn't give up personally. I remember the first time I tried this, I popped the bottle and was just whew, I've never met a more aptly named spirit. Yeah. It does, it's just, like you said, toasting marshmallows around a campfire, a bonfire. It just, it really does take you to a time and a place, which is super, super fun. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how I really love this. Obviously fun, neat, but try a cowboy coffee with it. Put it in an espresso martini. Do especially if you give it a good hard shake where it's got that nice frothiness at the top. Okay. So if you've got Campfire with some really great espresso, maybe a coffee liqueur obviously in there, and then you do that, and then do a toasted marshmallow or something. Got yourself a really good cowboy coffee.
All right. You heard it here, everybody. I don't drink coffee, but I know plenty of people out there that do and would be into that.
And don't get me wrong, I've done it with the bourbon and the double rye as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. I love switching that recipe up from vodka. Not knocking our friends in vodka, but it does. provides some complexity that you wouldn't necessarily expect, gives it a little more like robust foundation. And so I call all of them cowboy coffee, but Campfire is really, really fun in it, especially if it's, great, like quality espresso.
Yeah. I'm really digging this. Like every time I go back to it, it gets better and better. I noticed that. So this has limited release as well as, and I know the Bottled and Bond you said was distillery at this point.
Yeah.
But the Rendezvous as well. I didn't realize the Rendezvous was limited now. I mean, I'm sure I've heard it before, and
It was.
Okay.
So these are both. I'm sure just when I pulled them,
Okay.
because fun big company stuff.
Yeah, right.
Last year when we did the release in May was always Rendezvous, and in August was Campfire. So when I first got these samples, probably it was still a limited release. We didn't know that we were going to be opening the floodgate to Core 4 and to that return. I'd have to see. I think a lot of these labels probably also here in SoCal, like they're already done. So if you're pulling a new bottle, you might still get the gold embossing that shows like small batch or limited release on it. Moving forward, it probably won't have that. It'll probably look like the double rye and the bourbon.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So that's kind of the wall, if you will, that we want to see. Are these four, pictured together? Is really what we call like a perfect set. The good news is people love it. So I don't see us slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah.
We're very appreciative of the support of the following. I mean, since day one, since Rendezvous, but folks that have been with us on this ride and, find, I mean, people tell me all the time, like bourbon or double rye, that's their everyday drinker. They, have a pour, they make sure that that's in their cocktail at home, or if they go out and they see it. I mean, we're very fortunate. It's a pretty recognizable bottle. This is recycled glass. We make that down
Nice.
at a spot in Mexico that also does our glass for Casa Noble.
Cool.
So yeah, it's got this cool bubbling.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah, and now that we've changed the labels, they're all lined up. I think you saw in the old label that you pulled up in that bottle is the Ed Mel artist series. So all of those were very specially created by him. But we just continue to evolve and just hopefully, we got a, I'm not going to lie, we got a little bit of not fun fan mail about moving the Rendezvous and the Campfire back to limited releases because people love them so much.
Yeah.
So we heard the cries, we heard the criticism, and we did. We brought it back to full production, and now you can find these really anytime. That's part of the story and the narrative that I hope this podcast can even get out, is like letting people know Rendezvous, Campfire are back. Midwinter will still be a limited release. I believe you and I tasted the Prisoner Share, a partnership with Prisoner Wine Company.
Yeah.
That actually was super well received. It was only supposed to be a 2-year collaboration, but apparently it was so well received. We're going to do it again.
Nice.
So you should see a couple of those bottles. Definitely not a high production. They're super allocated. And then we also have Noble Share with Casa Noble. We'll be doing
dang, okay.
So with our Marquez barrels, which is, that's... Go and refer to the other podcast to learn all about it. But Marquez is a blend of 21 añejos. So añejo and extra añejo, aged 1 to 5 years, aged in French oak. Very hand-selected specialty oak. We're going to be doing a blend of bourbon and rye, from my understanding, finished in those Marquez barrels, which should be pretty cool. I've never had a tequila finished whiskey until I went to Nelson's Greenbrier. We actually did that. Charlie Nelson, one of our founders, big tequila guy. And it's really funny to hear the story from both him and Andy Nelson. Because Andy, being big brother, master distiller, of course, was like, I don't think that's going to be very good. And Charlie's like, no, trust me, we should do a tequila finish. We need to just play around. Because I don't think a lot of people know that Nelson's Greenbrier with Bell Mead was the first to do a sherry cask finish. It had not been done in American whiskey. So they were playing around with different finishes and did a Casa Noble finish. Really surprising. So I'm personally very excited. You were just at Greenbrier. I don't know if you tasted the Casa Noble finish, but I'm super excited to see what High West has done with it.
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
I wish I did.
Who knows if they have it even any more left. These are all our sister properties, part of Constellation Brands and our craft spirits department. We've got some amazing brands that we work with there. But I know when I first went to High West a couple years ago, walking through some of the barrel, like most of our aging is done in Salt Lake City, but we do have some barrels that who knows what they're doing with it. We're up at High West, and I was walking through and I saw one that was branded Casa Noble, and I was like, oh, what are we doing there? So it's really cool to see. We're starting to see some of those products come to life, which is really exciting. And then I've heard, little birdie has it, that Yippee Kaye might be making a return in a couple of years. So keep your eyes peeled for that. So.
That one is, I might be way off, but it's Rendezvous Rye, but in a sweet vermouth finish. Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, so we stopped making it more so from a supply standpoint. It wasn't going to be sustainable with our partners that we were using at the time. And it's funny, I usually say with High West, like, never say never. But I was told from our distilling team, like, no, like, we're not going to be doing that again. And then I think either late last year or early this year, we were on a call with the team. They were talking about some cool projects that are coming up. And it was like, oh, yeah, so actually, I think we might have figured out how to bring this back. Don't be surprised that, if the price tag is a bit higher, it's going to be super, super small production. But it does sound like Yippee is coming back for a limited run. So definitely. That's cool. And like I said, bottled in bond, that will be out next year as a limited release, which is super exciting. I also heard a rumor that Boo Rye will be coming as a national release, as it once was. So for those of you that don't know Boo Rye, one of my favorites, it's a blend of bourbon and rye. It's got the cute little jackalope on there. Yeah. He's really cheeky these days. So I'm excited to see those things come back, plus whatever else we're working on. But yeah,
that's awesome. That Casa Noble finish is really exciting. I've had a few or several now, like tequilas that are finished in William LaRue Weller or Blanton's or whatever. Like, that's becoming pretty popular, it seems now. And they're good, but it always puts me in a weird mood of like, well, I'd rather just have the bourbon or just have the tequila. It exists in this weird realm where it's like, I'd rather have just one, like the tequila or the bourbon on itself, not this kind of. But when I was in Owensboro, when I got to go to I flew into Nashville, got to see Greenbrier, then did some work in Owensboro, Kentucky. I was at a store and I tried a bourbon, a 6-year-old bourbon that was finished in Añejo tequila. I forget which tequila. And it was like World Whiskey Society was the bourbon or something. I don't know. I was pleasantly surprised by how well it worked. That was the first time I had bourbon finished with tequila.
Yeah.
So the thought of like a High West and a Casa Noble collab is extremely exciting to me. That's really cool.
It'll be really fun. I mean, I'm excited to try it. I think sometimes it's like you say, like you want one or the other. Yeah. In my experience with a lot of bourbon or whiskey finished tequilas, that because it's usually new American oak on the finish, it's just much like most of your tequila's made, but it just becomes a little too overpowering. Like you don't really still get the agave flavors that you love and why you're going towards agave versus whiskey in the first place. So I am really inclined to see this, reverse. And the fact that not a lot of people are doing it, over at Nelson Brothers, we were kind of probably also the first to do that. We like to toy around with a lot of finishes there as well. From Belle Meade, now our Nelson Brothers label, High West, again, similar cloth, we share a lot of practices between the teams and ideas and like, oh, you're doing that? We're working on this. I want to do that. And I will say that's a cool thing about being with Constellation. Sometimes people, craft distillers, small businesses that go and get bought up by larger companies. The consumer perception is you lose value, you lose quality. I will say that's one thing with Constellation I don't agree with or I haven't experienced is have there been growing pains? Of course, it is an adjustment going from you're independently run, you have these people at the helm, and now it's new systems coming into place. However, I would also say you've opened yourself up to a vast network of barrels and other people who are just as geeky and experimental and ingenious. So it's, we have actually our new VP of Craft Spirits is Pepe Hermosillo from Casa Noble. So he's heading things up at High West along with Casa Noble, along with Nelson's Green Briar, Copper and Kings, Mi Campo. And so it's really cool. Tara, who I was talking about, our sensory and blending expert at High West, she actually recently went down to Mexico to help work on a blend with Casa Noble and lended her expertise from the whiskey world down there. So what I see is we're opening a floodgate of just network and communication of, cool, you're down here, you have all of this skill set, we have this, I've tried this, I come from here. And so I'm very excited to see what's coming next, just because it's a lot of really cool nerdy folks like myself just wanting to play with, we've got great spirits in different parts of the world. So it's like, let's see what we can come up with. So I say, again, with High West, never say never.
Yeah.
You don't know what you'll see next. Who knows? I've heard rumors of even our Lab Series gin and vodka coming back. I do know the team really loves their gin at High West, which is fun. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see some of those goodies coming back to surface as well.
Right on.
Yeah.
Dang. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up here. Becky, thanks so much for sharing this lineup with us and giving us some insight on all of these expressions. This has been another great episode with you. I hope everyone gets a chance to check these out. The core four are pretty widely available, I'd say, at least these two. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, hopefully we're doing our jobs right, and you're starting to see Rendezvous and Campfire back, I like to say in the wild, in stores, on back bars. You're definitely going to find this cask collection. We don't get very many here in Southern California, so it's pretty select. If you see one, they're one of only a handful of places, either in shops or in bars that got it. Bottled in Bond, we won't see until next year unless you travel to the great state of Utah or to the distillery. But yeah, you'll see these two pretty regularly. Hopefully you'll start to see those more in circulation as we just spread the good word that they're back.
Yeah. Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Thanks, Rudy. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap on this one. Everyone, thanks for watching, and make sure to grab yourself a bottle of High West. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Drinks and a Movie podcast. You can now find us on Instagram at Drinks and a Movie Pod, where we'll be posting photos from all the various films that we discuss. You can also email us at drinksandamoviepod@gmail.com. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and thank you for listening.